In our research and production of 4 documentaries, Demographic Winter, Decline of the Human Family, Demographic Bomb, Demography as Destiny, and the New Economic Reality, Demographic Winter, and our latest documentary, Outcomes, the Family and Faith Factors, our production team interviewed many scholars, demographers, economists, sociologists, and civic leaders from around the world who gave evidence of major demographic changes that were taking place worldwide. We call this new season of change a demographic winter. So what is demographics? It is a study of the statistical data that makes up a population, its size, its growth, its decline, its birth rates, the age and gender makeup of a population, etc. So does the demographics of a country really matter? In 2011, I was in New York attending the United Nations Commission on Social Development, and to give an introduction screening at the UN Millennial Plaza of our latest documentary, The New Economic Reality, Demographic Winter. It was a beautiful morning in March as I was walking to the UN Plaza. The sun rays was just starting to peek around these giant buildings of Manhattan when I caught a glimpse of ships coming into the New York harbor, wondering if my European ancestors may have come through those same portals at a time in history when Americans understood the necessity of immigrants as needed for a country's continued growth and economic prosperity. In that film introduction, I shared the words of Phil Longman, a Washington, D.C. demographer and author of the book, The Empty Cradle, who stated that demographics may be the greatest predictor of the fate and future of society in the 21st century. Now, many are not aware that one of the most ominous dramas of modern times is quietly unfolding, as the world is headed towards a demographic tipping point, which threatens serious social and economic consequences. The world today has experienced a 50% decline in birth rates over the last 50 years, leaving over 70 countries around the world that will not replace the previous generation. If a country is to replace the previous generation, it takes a birth rate of 2.1 children to replace every 2 individuals, and all of Europe, for example, is only at 1.38. If a country's birth rate declines to 1.1, it puts the country in jeopardy of serious freefall, which is almost impossible to get turned around. The United Nations Population Division estimates that by the year 2050, that there will be 248 million fewer children under the age of 5 than there are at present. So what does this changing demographic mean for society? So what lessons maybe that we could learn from history? In the study of the decline and fall of the Greek Empire, Polybus in 150 BC stated, "Nowadays, all over Greece, in a general matter, such depopulation that towns are deserted and fields lie fallow. Although this country has not been ravaged by war epidemics, the cause of this harm is evident. The people, if they marry, will not bring up children as they ought. It is in this way that the scourge before us has rapidly developed." Shortly thereafter, Greece was annexed as a Roman state in 146 BC. Following by the fall of the Greek Empire, the Roman Empire entered a period of decline in which they lost 40% of their population, dropping from 47 million down to 29 million. We refer to this period of decline as the Dark Ages. In our interview with Dr. Gary Becker, recipient of the Nobel Prize in Economics, he stated that population reduction enters us into unknown terrain. Adam Smith, the greatest economist, said that economic prosperity comes from population growth, and depression is associated with declining populations. This could lead to very serious consequences. In 2005, in the introduction of our first documentary, Demographic Winter, The Decline of the Human Family, we interviewed a German demographer who informed us in Germany that their government had to close 280 schools. And the reason given was that there were not enough children coming up through the ranks, leaving them to wonder how they were going to man their farms and factories in the future. They understood that due to their aging population and low birth rates, that they would be experiencing a major labor shortage, which would mean a loss of government revenues, human capital, as needed to become a great and prosperous nation. They understood that if they really wanted to grow their workforce, what they would need to do is open their borders to all comers and let immigrants in which Germany took in approximately 2 million Syrians as needed to keep their industries operating. But that has an effect too, given, it really does have an effect on the changing of your culture. Nobel Prize winning economist Gary Becker, along with Dr. Nicholas Eberstadt from Harvard University, in our interviews with them, they pointed out how important human capital is for a country's continued prosperity.
Why is productivity important for economies?
Growth in an economy is based on productivity advance, which is the engine, fundamentally the engine of growth in any economy.
If human capital growth is essential for modern economic growth, how is human capital impacted by fertility decline?
Well, it's hard to sustain economic growth without human capital increases. And so you can increase human capital either by getting everybody way educated and improving each person's productive capacity, or you can have more people. There's really only two ways to do it.
The way we measure economic progress is through what we call the gross domestic product. Now, many people don't realize that when the gross domestic product grows, most of that growth is population growth. Economists define gross domestic product as the number of people, workers specifically, times their productivity.
Current demographic trends in all rich countries mean that GDP growth won't come anymore from a growing number of workers. For example, the number of U.S. workers is projected to be stagnant for at least the next 2 decades. And Europe has an even worse problem with its working age population.
Subreplacement fertility a generation and more ago means that the working age population, age 15 to 64, is going to be slowing and then peaking and then declining more or less indefinitely as far as the demographer's eye can see.
So if the working age population is shrinking, how can we increase human capital?
Well, if you have fewer and fewer workers, each one of them has to get that much more productive in order to even keep the economy from shrinking, right? So in the context of flat or falling population, we have a much greater challenge just to keep the current standard of living what it is. That's not controversial at all. That's just economics 101.
Without more people, productivity increases and economic increases can only come from our working either harder or smarter. Is this a problem?
What we in the West have been doing is putting all of our eggs in the human capital basket and saying we're going to increase the productivity of each person and letting the expansion of population part just go down the tubes and not even pay any attention to it. Well, we've come to the end of the road on that. We can't keep going down that particular path.